spoil it.
All right, well, good morning, everybody. Good morning, participants, and welcome to the Teen Book Festival. This is the session Picture This with Alex Campi, Trung, Nguyen, and Andrew Smith. So I wanted to give a general introduction for these three authors and then turn it over to them so they can talk about illustrating in their own work and how their images and their imagery adds to the general narrative so far. So Alex Campi describes herself as a general comics nerd person, and she was nominated for the Eisner Award for Best Limited Series and Manga Series. And her current work is The Backups, which is relatively new, and she's got a copy right there. Trung is fresh off his Magic Fish, which was also nominated for a top book on the American Library Association Rainbow List of 2021. And we also have Andrew Smith, who wrote Grasshopper Jungle, which won the Boston Globe Horn Award and the 2015 Michael Prince Honor Award. And his work that includes graphics in it would be Exile from Eden and Winger. So I was wondering if y'all just wanted to talk about like what it's like to write something knowing that you're also writing for images to be included in it. It's not the same as a typical author. When we think of the author experience, we think of somebody just sitting down and writing. But what is it like to create something knowing that images is going to be part of the whole narrative?
Well, I mean, one thing to talk about off the jump is that each of us, like both like Trung and Andrew and I, all work in slightly different ways. And there are a ton of different ways to work as someone who wants to be involved in graphic novels or comic books or web comics or just, sequential art. I draw very badly. So what I do is I partner with people, and Trung's done a project with me in the past, and I just write the script, then pass it off to more talented friends to create the art. And then it comes back to me and I put the sound effects and the word balloons and the letters in the word balloons and do all that stuff. And so we pass it back and forth like a bit of a collaborative band. Trung both writes and draws. So his process for scripting might be different than mine because I have to put all my ideas on the page so other people understand it. Trung just has to interpret his own scrawled notes. And then Andrew works both back and forth with writing and illustration. So he's likely got a third way of doing it.
You know, when actually work pretty. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, please go ahead, Trung.
Oh, I was just going to say that I think I actually, now that I've written a thing, I work pretty similarly to Alex, where I need to have everything on a page first because you can't edit down from nothing. And going at things image first is something that I'm used to because I've had writers, I've worked with writers, and so I didn't have to think about that kind of editable portion of the storytelling. And when you're making graphic narrative work, you kind of have to prioritize the storytelling and the impact of the narrative over things. And so that does change the way that I think about writing versus drawing and how those two things work together. And so I've become one of those people who needs a script first before I incorporate images.
For me, I've had 14 novels that have been published so far. And every time I've ever written a novel, I've always drawn pictures in it, without any real long-term expectations of what those pictures will do. But my hard copies always have drawings in them. And when I started off, my first novel that sold that has illustrations in it, some of the publishers liked the way that I drew, which is unexplainable to me. And then the publisher that ended picking it up, we found an artist, and the artist just simply redrew everything that I drew in writing the novel. But since then, a couple of my works that have come out that I drew illustrations in. The first one, I had no idea the publisher was going to put this drawing that I put down the side of the page in the book. And then the next one, I had intended for illustrations to be in, and I drew them. And I was very surprised that the publisher said, "We're using your artwork." And I had already destroyed it. So I had to go back and redraw all the drawings that I had drawn when I was writing this novel.
My daughter's 10 and she's always so happy when novels have illustrations in them. That's how she got into Crested Crowell. Just because I always thought it was a terrible con that the more advanced reading we got, the less pictures we got. That's not fair. That's not fun.
Mm-hmm.
So it sounds like each of you sort of have a different experience when it comes to including artwork in the stories that you're telling, right? So Alex, you work with other people, other illustrators, Trung, you work with, you just do your own drawings. And Andrew, it sounds like you didn't really expect sometimes for your drawings to make it in. So I wonder, how does that compare when it comes to the publishing side of things? Like, I understand how a publisher might give feedback to your stories, but how do you get feedback on your art, the art that's included in your stories?
Oh, wow. Okay. So this is like a whole process. When you're doing it, like, I don't want to spend a ton of time on this because like the folks out there watching this, like your first published work is likely going to be like, you're going to post it on Tumblr or Twitter or, you know, on Webtoons, or like maybe just making little zines for yourself and your friends or selling them at a convention. So there is no publisher, like formal publisher feedback. But the way it works, I mean, if we're going to talk about the straight from script step-by-step stage, is my publisher will give me feedback on my script. I have to finish that first. And I often write the whole script for a project before like taking it out because I'm weird. Most people don't do that. And then there are several stages in the drawings. The first one is usually thumbnails or layouts or pencils. Like it depends on the artist, but it's a loose layout of the page. And that's when you find out, that's when like the most changes happen. You know, and there are stages for script drawing as well. There's outline, there's breakdowns, and then there's full script. And I can go into that later if anyone's interested. And again, everyone's working methodology is different, but the first feedback from the publisher should come at the pencil/layout stage, because that's the easiest to change. You know, the drawings are rough, you can see what's going to be on the page, but that's where you say, oh, well, actually, maybe this part wasn't scripted right, and maybe we should do this a different way, or ooh, that's not very clear, or I don't think there's enough room for the letters here, or I'm, you know, that I'm not sure about the anatomy on this page. There's tons of feedback. You know, you always try to give one compliment for every constructive bit of criticism you get, so it's not all like super negative, because that's just depressing. And then there's the ink stage where you firm up the line work, and then there's the color stage, and then there's the letter stage. You know, by the time it gets to colors, you shouldn't be giving any notes except for anything on the colors. But also a lot of times, especially with publishers that are new to graphic novels, you're actually educating them on the art process as you go along. I've had a lot of times when I've had to teach a publisher how to critique a graphic novel, because they'll come back at the color stage and say, oh, well, we need to change this. And we're like, no, you missed your chance, baby. But the TLDR is like, you try to give as much feedback as you can at the earliest stage of art, because it's the most respectful to your artist in terms of respecting the amount of time it takes to create art and change art.
Yeah, typically if you're collaborating between a writer and an artist, there is this, well, at least for me, I'm kind of spoiled because I've worked with Alex before and I've only worked with a couple of other writers who are really, really adamant about advocating for artists and making sure that we're compensated fairly. And so I've had like a very smooth experience, and they tend to be pretty consistent in that we tend to know what each other's work is like. And so we kind of expect certain things from like the script versus the art, and like how that would, you know, like comfortably fit together. And so usually the feedback, like I feel like people get really precious about critical feedback and get really nervous about it, but the feedback is usually about like, well, they already know what my work looks like. It's not about the quality of my work, it's about maximizing how well the story can be told. And so it's usually about adjusting things to make sure that the narrative impact is much greater or as efficient or as impactful as possible. So it's usually not as scary as someone might think the critical feedback stage usually is. But when it comes to editors, there is a learning curve if they're sort of more adept at doing work that doesn't incorporate a lot of images. And so you have to talk a little bit about like, okay, so you have to identify what composition looks like and like how a reader might potentially scan a page, and things have gotten much better on that end in my experience. And so that's not something I typically have to worry about, but Alex has been doing this for a bit longer than me. So she's probably had to corral a lot of editors into making sure that they know what they're doing.
I had somebody, I sent in a page once for a graphic novel and said like, here's page 1, all lettered and print ready. Please check all the specs and make sure that these are the correct specs for you and for this publisher, which was a large, you know, Big 5 publisher, this new graphic novels division. And they were like, yeah, sure, it's absolutely great. Love it, love it, love it. At page 19, they go, oh, well, actually, these are the wrong size. And we were doing like standard image page sizes. And he's like, can you go back and change all of this? And we're like, no.
Yeah,
So,
one of the
yeah,
things
so
that you have
there's
to
like
consider.
yeah,
Go
like,
ahead.
I mean, but also like, I've been doing this a while, so I'm not afraid to turn around and say to an editor, like, no, you know, we're like, it's a very tough line to walk, because you have to, the most important thing is to tell the story well. It's not about your ego. It's not about your specific vision for the characters, especially when you're working with an artist, because you have to leave 50% for them to bring to the table, because otherwise they're not invested. They're not your marionette, you know, like you just have to chill out, because most of the time the artist is going to improve your vision. And so you need to shut up, smile, and say thank you. And you need to pick the hills you're going to die on. So if it's an ego hill, like, don't die on that hill, please. If it's I'm worried the reader's not going to understand this, or, you know, we gave you the opportunity to critique this, and this is a minor critique and it's coming too late in the process and it's not going to affect the reader, that's when you say, hey, wait a sec.
I also want to put it out to anybody who is a participant. You can definitely enter your questions in the chat if you have specific questions for our authors. And we can just keep moving on. I guess I wanted to open this up. I know this is a panel about graphic novels and how you're illustrating in your work, but what sort of strikes me as a commonality or a common theme across a couple of y'all's pieces is the reemergence of LGBT themes, and like how we are giving more space for those stories in our literary canon nowadays. Back when I was a kid and I was a teen, I know I was looking for gay stories and there were only a couple available, but now it seems there's an influx. So I wonder if you want to talk about how society is changing to allow for more of those stories to come in, and allow for more of those LGBT stories to manifest, so that we can see different angles, different intersectionalities.
I mean, having a lot of queer editors helps. I mean, it's just like, you know, I mean, folks want to make the effort, but like queer editors kind of understand and are interested in and supportive. You know, it's why we need more editors of color as well. So, you know, like all stories, you know, all stories become normal, you know, rather than it being something someone feels like they have to seek out from outside their own experience.
I think it's always been, you know, in my case, because inclusivity has always been like a major component for me as an educator and as a parent, and just, you know, trying to live in community and in society. And back, you know, when I wrote Winger so long ago, it was a pretty rare thing to have gay characters that were in a book, and they weren't there just because they were gay. They just happened to be characters who were whole and real. And I think that it resonated with a lot of young readers and adult readers as well. And I think it continues to. And it's great that there's that the spaces in our work that is intended to kind of be a mirror or a reflection to what we see going on around us, that those spaces are broadening and showing more of what we really are as a people.
I'm giggling because Wendy's cat is like walking by, casually whipping her face with her tail.
So the next question sort of takes us back to the craft side of things. What happens when there are creative differences between a writer and an artist? And I guess that question becomes sort of meta for Trung. What happens if you're having differences as an artist and as someone?
I think it's actually pretty similar to like if you're working with a writer, if you're collaborating with someone else. I've discovered that like my writer self and my artist self are oftentimes terribly at odds because I'll write something and it's one of those things where it's like, okay, so I came at comic books and graphic narratives in like as an artist, someone who is visually oriented. So I have a certain kind of bias and perspective about how stories should be told. And so kind of coming from that perspective, you kind of get a lot of like, there's a lot of stuff in your brain about like, how do you imply storytelling with the things that the characters are wearing, and like what does the composition of the page look like, and how does that impact the ways that the readers will get the sense of the character space and environment and that sort of thing. That stuff is very important, but does not mean quite as much unless you have a story to attach it to. And so when I wrote something out completely, I'm like, oh, like all of the biases that I had about like being an artist, like how I wish writers would write for me, I don't know how to write for me. And so it is a process of like, okay, so you have to have a story first. You have to have something really kind of narratively consistent and intentional, and then you kind of go back in and you start to make adjustments to your script, depending on, you know, how you'd like to, you know, increase the impact of the storytelling visually later. And so it becomes like it is a necessary back and forth. It's not like, I don't really consider it to be a tension. There will be times when I'm like, oh, like I wish I'd written this a little bit differently, but also like you can adjust things. So there's always opportunities to like grow and make things a little bit better. So it's really not a matter of tension for me. And I've never really had, I've never had a collaboration where where a collaborator says like, I wish this were adjusted a little bit because of this. And I'm like, no, that doesn't make any sense to me. Like usually I'm like, yeah, like it never occurred to me that this would make the storytelling better. And that totally works. And I wouldn't have thought about things that way. And so it really just sort of changes depending on where you are in the process, the script writing process. You kind of go in completely not really knowing what the page is going to look like. And by the time you get to the more visual elements, then you can kind of go back and refine a little bit. So I wouldn't say that there's ever been a moment where those two things have been at odds for me, but it's definitely difficult to reconcile those things. It is a challenge, but it helps to have communicative collaborators. It's a really fun and dynamic process if you can get it down.
Yeah, I think it's like, as Trung says, it's really, really important to be respectful of your collaborators and what they bring to the table, and knowing ahead of time that like, things you script will like sometimes won't work. I mean, I've been doing this for a while now. And just the other day, I rewrote 3 pages of Bad Karma, which is my book on Panel Syndicate. You can download it for free on the fly for Ryan, because the pages were too tight. Like it needed to be, rather than like, it needed to be 5 pages. As he was getting to it. And we've also had discussions where like on layouts where he's like, the thing you wrote, like I'm having a little trouble with that. What if I did it like this? And I'm like, yeah, you're right, that's better. So part of it is just simple, like grown up, respectful communication. Sometimes that doesn't happen. Sometimes the collaborative relationship breaks down. It is just something that will happen over the course of your career if you are doing graphic novels, either as a writer or as an artist, that you will occasionally have to walk away from a project or find a different writer or find a different artist, because sometimes, you know, you'll start working with somebody who's incredibly talented, and then you find out, you know, they have trouble collaborating with a woman, for example. Like I once had someone send me an all caps email that said, I am in charge of the visuals. And I was just like, not anymore, pal. He hasn't worked much in the industry since. I wonder why. I mean, not because of me. Like I don't, once you know, I don't say boo about anybody unless someone like contacts me for a reference. It's not my, like there's too much living to do out there than to bother, you know, on somebody like that. But you know, it is important that you kind of leave your ego at the door, but also you don't, you know, do no harm but take no shit.
And don't cross Alex to Campi.
I'm hard to annoy. Like it takes a long time to get on my list, but once you are, you're there forever.
I've sent Alex some like very basic questions, which is just very annoying, cloying questions. She's never been impatient with me.
I never found her questions basic. It was fine. Like it's, you know, I mean, every time you work with someone new, and I'm doing this right now, I've got a middle grade pitch I'm developing with Ted Brandt and Rose Stein, who are old friends. And I've known these guys forever. They've done 2 shorts with me already. This is our first long form project together. And the first 10 pages, you're really like, you're getting to know the characters, you're getting to know the style of the book. Everybody's figuring out each other and how they work and how much feedback. Cause like I give a lot of feedback, most of it's positive, but you know, I'm much more like, a lot of writers don't. and they're not involved in the graphic process, possibly because I do all my own lettering and stuff, which is very rare. I'm much more like kind of on it. And some people are like, ooh, you know, especially if they're just come off a long collaboration with a writer who's like, here's the script, bye, call me later, which is about half of writers apparently. And, you know, it's just, you just have to accept that if you're like, wow, this feels really hard, there is a learning process that encompasses the first 10 to 20 pages of the book, and you just need to relax. If it's still hard or it's getting extremely negative, then maybe this is not a collaborative partnership that would work. Or if somebody, you know, isn't turning in their pages when they should. I mean, you got to bear in mind that if you're not paying people for pages, they're going to turn in the pages when they bloody well feel like, because they have to earn money to live. So please pay your artists. Please pay for your pitch art. It will get there faster. But also sometimes folks are just like bad at managing themselves. And it's not like they're lying to you, they're lying to themselves when they say like, oh, I'll have it all to you by Friday. Friday goes by, whoosh, no contact. And then you're like emailing them next Wednesday, like, are the pages coming? Is everything okay? And people do have like family emergencies and stuff. So like you need to kind of be respectful and check in and make sure they're all right. But, you know, if someone just is continually mismanaging their time and never getting you the pages, you may not want to commit to doing a 200-page book with them.
And this process that Alex is describing of getting to know someone creatively, if you're collaborating, you have to do it again with every single project, even if you've worked with the person before. Because I have figured out that like there is no consistent process to how any project goes. There's no consistent process to how like any collaboration goes. And so you kind of have to reinvent the wheel every single time, because there are going to be adjustments that need to be made. And so kind of coming in with preconceived notions about like what this process should go like is always a recipe for a bit of a disaster, because you just have to keep kind of communicating and negotiating with the person that you're working with to make the thing that you want to make. Because if you kind of like get really precious about how things have to be done, like comics is so dynamic, like the things that we have to do to make sure that your product gets done on time and like the things that you want to achieve are achieved, like that changes constantly. And so there's this constant renegotiation and constant communication that needs to happen. So you have to keep doing this every time you start something new.
Yeah, like, well, there's this wonderful Raymond Chandler quote, you know, marriage is like a newspaper, you need to make it fresh every damn day. And that's a little bit like a collaborative, like each project, you know. I'd be interested what Andrew has to say about this, because like Andrew, I also do prose novels, and I found out that like every prose novel itself is a different process. So like, you know, just as every graphic collaboration is different, like some books are just like, they're there and they just come out and it's real easy. And some books you're like, just, you know, just messing around with them for 10 years and they're never quite right. And then suddenly, you know, you're off making popcorn and it all comes together and you're like, damn it. So I'm interested if that's something that happens to you, or do you have a very set process with creation?
No, definitely everything I've ever done has been a different process. But I also find myself, and probably this is a great fault, but I'm the person who just agrees to just about everything all the time. I mean, if I could probably count on one hand the times that I've actually said no to an editor or an art director. And so in my first experience, for example, in doing Winger, was really interesting because we did decide collaboratively to go with a different artist, and I got to look at some of the artist's sketches and pick him out. And then he started to draw what I drew. And then the art director who was going to do the cover started shooting photographic images. And then we decided, you know, what was going to be the cover. And then Sam, who was the illustrator of Winger, went back and he redrew all the panels that he had drawn to make the character look like the character who was actually in the photo shoot. So it was a really weird thing of like life imitating art that is actually imitating life or something like that, where the photo and this model actually then became the actual character that was in the graphic novel pages of the work. So, and that was, you know, that was kind of a bizarre process as far as the evolution of the artwork is concerned, but it was the illustrator's first gig. He was a really young guy, and he's gone on to be very successful, and I love the stuff that he did. I loved his first sketches too, that didn't look anything like the photographic images, And I even told him, I go, hey, that's going to be my next tattoo. Where
hold up the cover of Winger. I know you've got it right behind you. Show us.
It's here. And see, and the thing is that the illustrator Sam Bosma, so he started to redraw this character in all of the, and I can never open to a graphic novel page, in all of the panels, he redrew him so that he looks like this guy here. And then he did the same thing with the sequel, Standoff. So yeah, it was a really different and unique process. But I was going to ask you guys too, how do you know, well, I don't know, when is too long working on something too long? I have a dear friend who's a very accomplished artist, Matt Faulkner, and he and I have been working on a graphic novel for probably about the last 6 years. And I don't know where it's going, but it looks really cool.
I mean, there's no too long. Like in some ways, like the way I set deadlines, especially with the new project, is I ask people when they think they can get it to me, because I don't know what else they've got going on in their lives. You know, like they could have kids or responsibilities or other jobs, and it's not up to me to like arbitrarily be like, I need this next week. Like not unless I'm paying a metric F ton of money, which I'm not usually, unfortunately. And so I ask them when they think they can get it to me, and then I check in, and then, I mean, it depends. Like, I mean, you know, bad karma, we're just like no deadline, only vibes. We're just just like, it's all written. And then like when Ryan has a day job and he's got kids and he's got a webcomic he does as well. So he does like maybe 2 or 3 pages a week, and it's a 275 page graphic novel. And we've got 150 pages up on Panel Syndicate already. So, you know, Ryan, I never chase Ryan because like the pages come, but also, and then Dee does it, our colorist does it around other projects, and they're all paid, you know, they get money for this. You know, we always just said we were just going to get this done when it happens. And, you know, I've got another project, Reversal, that's a dark horse with Skylar Patridge. And, you know, she's doing 15 pages of pencils or inks a month. You know, it's more like once something is picked up, or like, you know, you just get a sense from people if it's going to be a successful collaborative relationship fairly early on when you're getting pitch work together, about whether they can be reliable. And sometimes you'll just come across a wonderful, beautiful artist, and they're a wonderful person, and you're just like, I can't work with you because nothing that comes out of your mouth is remotely reliable. And it's not because you're a bad person, it's just because that's how it is. And it's up to you. Like if it's a close friend and you're just vibing, like that's fine. I am going to say something that will save many young lives in their first book, which is, and I also haven't ever really had bad notes. I mean, especially on my prose work, I've had 2 great editors. I've only done 2 novels. I mean, you've done like 14, so this is all new to me. And all the notes have been really good. Now, the first time you get notes back from an editor, folks, I want you to reply back. Thank you very much for the notes. I'll get back to you in a few days. I want you to read through the email, go have a little cry, shut your laptop down and ignore it for the weekend, and then come back to them on Monday. Do not think about those notes. Do not get mad about those notes. Do not get depressed about those notes. It likely is the first time that someone's presented you with professional critique. It's all right. You'll get through it. You're going to be like, but my baby. And then over the weekend, you'll be like making a cup of tea and you'll be like, you know, actually that's kind of right that they said about that page, you know, I didn't want to hear it, but yeah. And hopefully, you know, in most professional critique, they will talk about the things they really like that you did well as the things. If you just get like the Nelly negative critique list, that's not great on your collaborator or editor's part.
I'm glad y'all are talking about this because it just, again, goes to underscore how, like when we think about the process of art, it's more than just one person. It's more than the author. It's a whole team of people, and it's a whole group of people that come together to create this thing. So teens, if you ever get mad at your teachers for assigning group work, thank them. We had another question come through the chat, and it's about sort of this creative process. So with graphic text and with narrative text too, we have the arc to think about in chapters or in sections. So what makes you decide when and where to cut a scene, and how do you decide how you're going to cut the scene?
the comment about the notes thing. Yeah, I almost always agree with my editors, and I also, like Alex, when I get notes back, I don't even read the whole thing. I just kind of read the first line to get a gist of where this is going to go. And I print it out and I fold it up and I look at it in a few days and I annotate it. I write on it while I'm reading it. And it's not nearly as bad as I've kind of built it up in my mind to be.
And if it's on paper, you can't rage reply.
Totally. And I also find that I've also found that it's just always been the case. I mean, editors rock. I mean, when it's always been the case that when an editor has suggested, maybe you don't need this here. And, you know, and as a writer, my first job was writing for a newspaper and I got paid by the word in a local newspaper. And so when you're paid by the word, you want to make your stories as long as possible, right? So after I get a novel sold to a publisher, I don't mind cutting 3 or 4 pages here or there out of it because they've already paid me for every word that I've written. And usually when the editor suggests cutting a scene out, it's always made it tighter. And the same thing is true with when an editor has suggested making, shortening a panel or extending or blowing something up and extending it a little bit bigger as well.
On the prose side, like I have the opposite problem from you. I'm a thriller writer, so I underwrite, and I'll turn in my first draft, like for Heartbreak Incorporated, which comes out next month. The first draft was like 86,000 words, and then I decided to go tighten it up, and it became 101,000 words.
Wow.
Yep. I mean, admittedly, the first draft was, yeah, thrillers aren't written; they're rewritten. Also, like it's like my work is quite fast paced. And I look at the story as, do you ever play Jenga? It's like this tower block game and you try to pull blocks out, and your goal is to pull blocks out until the next person to pull a block out will make the tower fall down. Revising should be like Jenga. You need to take out as many blocks as you can until just before the tower falls down, and then that's the correct amount of story to have. And also, if you're bored writing it, they're going to be bored reading it. Because if you're like, I'm still in the scene, I don't know how to get out of it, the scene should have ended a page ago.
Yeah, I mean, I since I do mostly graphic narrative stuff, like I think about transitions a lot. And so if I'm asked to cut something out of a story just because like it doesn't really make a lot of sense or it's extraneous or like literally there are physical limitations to how many pages that I can do within a certain time frame in which I've promised to deliver this product. So I think about like how to like elegantly transition and how to keep the themes kind of intact. But it all just like, it really just depends on what those kind of logistical considerations are sometimes. Like sometimes it's really just like, this does not serve the story. It needs to be removed so that the story can continue along a pace and the reader doesn't get bored like reading stuff that doesn't like amount to anything narratively speaking. So it's usually kind of about like, how do you tell the story a little bit more elegantly? And it's I don't know why I get precious about like cutting things sometimes. And editorial feedback is really great. Like I don't really think about things in terms of like positive and negative feedback because that feels like being graded to me, and that doesn't like, that always feels not great. And I think about feedback in terms of like things that can be static, like this is great, don't change it, and things that are dynamic. And so you like editors will ask for adjustments, and that's not something that is unreasonable. Like that's usually something that will improve the quality of the work that you're putting out. So I don't really think about them in terms of like, oh, like this is a thing that I wish wouldn't change. Like this is negative feedback, they don't like this. It's, they wish things were different so that things would either make more sense or the story would flow a little bit better. Like it's like, you can't really come in with thinking that any feedback and adjustments are like a negative impactful thing. So I've never really had a whole lot of problems with that. But yes, cutting things and making sure that they transition elegantly is sort of my priority when it comes to making sure that the story continues to flow.
Yeah,
Trung brings up a really important point in that the graphic novels, like most of us still read them on paper, and you have something called the page turn, which means when you turn the page, to a splash. Now, if someone said, and this is a splash page, it goes across both pages. If someone said, "Hey, Alex, this chapter starts really slow. Can you cut the first page?" well, no, I can't, because then I have to change this image too to a single page, because then it flops over here. So there's a lot of like when you are adding or cutting, and as you write, you'll plan for what's called the page turn, which is like the really classic comic book. Right-hand page has lots of information. I'm not going to be able to find something here. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, I'm going to hold this up if I, so like right-hand page has lots of information. This is what's known as a 9-panel grid. I love them. And then you turn the page and it's just something, you pretend this is a giant splash page. Then there's like a really dynamic image here, and you can't see that image because you are literally turning the page. And then that's your time for this little, oh, wow moment. And it's either a cliffhanger or it's a moment of wonder or just something visually really, really pretty. And so you have to that's how you write. So if you stick one page in, it ruins your page turns for the rest of the book. So when you're doing additions and deletions, you have to think of it in 2-page increments in order to make the rest of your script flow harmoniously. So sometimes when you're talking about whole pages, you're always thinking about, how you're going to add or delete 2 pages rather than just 1 page. Adding or deleting on a single page, like, oh, maybe we can remove this panel, or, oh, maybe we need a little inset here for information. That's a much easier process. But again, all of this is stuff that has to be either addressed at the script stage, if it's, significant additions or deletions, or at or just before the pencil stage, which is why I was talking about how in Bad Karma, I'm always reading a little bit ahead, and I wrote the script like a year and a half ago. So every so often I'm like, oh, I rushed this bit. Ryan, hang on, rewrite.
So this is, I want to be mindful of time because we got 5 minutes left. And this is great because we're talking a lot for the audience about like the craft side of things, like as a writer. But as a reader of graphic fiction, I'm wondering if y'all want to talk a little bit about where your characters come from. What's the inspiration for your characters? And how do you develop those characters as graphic text, but also as a narrative?
Well, I can just start off by just saying that all of my characters are really kind of iterations of myself at different times in my life, or they're people that I know. So I don't feel like I'm just, pulling characters out of the vapor. I feel like I'm just writing from experience and with a lot of artistic license. Using that kind of as a raw form to shape, what I want this person to be like in text or in image.
Trung, I've talked a ton, so please.
Okay, I'm thinking about okay, I mean, the trouble with me is that I'm very green at this. Like, writing and making my own work is a very new process for me, and so I'm still sort of dynamically discovering what it is that I like to do. And so far, I think the thing that I've sort of forgiven myself for is that I like to make stories that are a little bit confessional, and so all of the characters kind of hew very closely to my own experiences, and I do kind of like to draw from things that I sort of know and understand. It's almost like I don't have to stretch quite as far empathetically to make something convincing come to life on the page. And that's something that I've, a lot of colleagues have told me, okay, yes, if your first project is always going to be at least a little bit confessional, so you might as well kind of lean into it and have fun with it. And I wonder what that'll look like later on. I think my relationship with whether or not things kind of hew really closely to my experiences, or if there's something that I can sort of draw a little bit more further away from me from the ether, that's probably going to change. And I think my process of creating characters and telling stories kind of outside of the ken of my own experiences usually sort of orbits around something that's true to me. And so I'll think about something that I can empathetically understand, and then I adjust things around it. Like, what would happen if I made a different choice? How would I react if the situation were slightly different in this way? And so it's kind of a matter of kind of pushing and pulling around this kind of orbit of my own experiences to sort of not tell something that's entirely autobiographical.
That's a really important thing, though, forgiving yourself, because I think a lot of younger writers, and I know this was me in prose, feel really blocked because the thing they like to read is not necessarily the style they like to write. I mean, I love really flowery, lyrical, internal description and metaphor writing. novels, and I can't do that. I write like Hemingway. It's all very spare, very surgical, like pacey. People die, usually in the first chapter. Like you know, there's always a cliffhanger at the end of every chapter, and so you kind of have to, you know, you're not going to be able to write like your fave. You just need to figure out how to write like you, and it can take 100,000 words of like various half-finished novels to do that, and that's just a process that you go through. So please, like, forgive yourself and try to have fun and trust your own voice. Like, your voice is what happens, like your voice and your style is what happens while you're doing other things. So just do your best writing the story, and don't compare yourself to books you really like or styles of writing you really like, because you'll often just like be setting yourself up for not disappointment, but like you won't work. Like you're you, and that's going to keep frustrating you unless you just let yourself be you. And Andrew, there's a wonderful Milan Kundera quote about my characters are my and my friends' unrealized possibilities. And I think that's true for a lot of us. It's like, you know, we're sitting there in front of like Pro Tools or some sort of music mixing software, and we're saying like, let's take my personality, and what if I just up this part of it and diminish that part? And like, what if I take Trung's personality and what I know about Trung, and what if like I emphasize this part of him and like de-emphasize that part, and then he becomes someone else, and then we present these characters with a problem, and how do they react? I mean, for me, most of my characters at this point, because my work isn't very confessional, but there are significant kernels of truth in it. There's like significant kernels of emotional truth. My characters usually start off with a feeling or a moment, or like someone comes into my head and they do a thing. Like I'm just sitting there like staring out the window, daydreaming, and I imagine a character and they do something that's very specific. And I'm like, wow, I want to know more about this person. And I'm just turning over in my head who they are and what they do. And it's all based on this one little emotional moment that they just went pop, and there they are. And it can take years. I mean, I have a paper notebook, I'll scroll notes, story notes in it. And then eventually those people are fully realized enough that I start trying to attach a plot to them. And that can take even longer. And then sooner or later, they're like, yeah, we're a story now. You go write us.
So I want to thank our authors. Thank you so much for coming. For all of you teens and guests who are here, you're here because you're passionate about graphic text, right? And as a reading teacher, I sort of understand that, right? Graphic text is becoming, it's more than a genre now, it's a medium. And so if you ever are talking to your teachers and they're like, why are you reading that? You can say, well, listen, I actually saw authors talk about the nuance and the artistry and the craft involved in graphic text. And there's so much to it that it deserves this sort of recognition in this sort of moment in history. So thank you so much. I want to give each of you a chance one more time to plug your book. So we've got Trung, who had Magic Fish. I'm gonna hold it up. You got it right there?
Oh yes, right here.
Nice.
And you can follow Trung on Twitter at Trungles. Like you can, you know, I mean, I can't speak for Trung, but like like if you want to ask us like respectful questions on Twitter or Facebook or something,
Sure.
Not Facebook.
Yes.
Stay away from Facebook. It's bad. Twitter or like Instagram.
Do y'all want to put your Twitter handles or Instagram handles in the chat? So if anybody wants to follow, then they can just see it. Alex de Campi is working on the backups right now. She's been referencing that a few times. And Andrew Smith, you're working on Winger right now. That's the book.
No, I'm not. I'm working on something else. I got okay, Exile from Eden. That's got my own artwork, and I'm the author illustrator of that novel. It's the sequel to Grasshopper Jungle. And you know what?
Show us your art. Oh my God! Like,
if you know, kids out there, young people, if you ever do have any problem with pushback from teachers, send them my way. I don't have any problem dealing with teachers. And to respond very quickly to a question from Katie, I am never committed to any project until I type the words. There's a little picture for you.
That's really nice.
Until I type the words "the end." That's when I'm committed to something. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. Speaking of the end, it's been great, and have a great rest of your day at the Teen Book Festival.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great panel. Good job, everybody.
Okay, cool. I'm gonna go walk my dog, and then, or do
I have to ask, what type of dogs do you have?
Oh, I have a pit bull named Sarge. He's actually in the other
Aw.
room. Normally he's right
too.
behind me on the bed,
Oh,
like doing something with his pig dragon, because Sarge says traditional masculinity is for chumps and all dragons should be pink.
I'm not going to argue with Sarge.
I think has that same dragon, but in purple.
There you go.
It's awesome.
Thank you so much.
It was great meeting both
Yes.
of you. And
Yes, thank you. That was great. I'll see
around.
Alex later today because we'll talk again. But yes, thank you so much for moderating. This was such a lovely panel. I will see you later.
yeah, peace out. Just trying to figure out where I got to go next.
Know that feeling.
We still have a few teen participants joined. So we're going to be closing out the panel. You might want to figure out where you're going to your next one.
Where do the Google Docs live? The Google Docs live on, they were shared with us, or is it just, there's a link?
They were shared with us.
In an email.
Yeah. And during training.
Oof, missed that boat, huh?
You've done a great job.
Here's a Google Drive that'll get you closer to where you want. I'll send it directly to you, Dan. Hopefully you can access that. That's where if you back up to the TBF panel introductions, that's where the questions and stuff were.
Got it. Okay.
So you go to the master schedule to figure out what you're doing, and then you can go to the questions for that particular panel.
Well, okay, so hold on. I only have that 3 to 3:45 time slot folder.
So your next one is the same as mine.
Oh,
Too
sweet.
dark is just dark enough.
All right,
So I
sweet.
can
So let's
send you
just,
that link. And we'll meet some people over there. And then they sent an email with the Zoom links, which you must have gotten since you made it in.
okay, so I'll see you over there.